Hello friends, in this video Scooter and I are going to show you this vintage radio that I found at a thrift store for $20. It dates from about 1934. I've already shot the video that you're about to see when I'm recording this one. I'm departing from my normal format a little bit by telling you how the story ends in advance. So what you'll see soon is the kind of discovery process of me looking at the radio and taking it apart in kind of the usual way, if you're familiar with my format. But I'm treating this one specially for the fact that it turns out, after doing some research after I shot the video you're about to see, that this is a very rare radio. Now, whether or not it's valuable, Scooter and I can't be sure yet, but anyway, it's at least rare. Not only is the radio rare, but the design is rare. And one hint of that is this is a very compact radio, which is listed as 4 tubes. Turns out this isn't actually a tube, it's a power resistor, or known as a ballast tube in those days. But this supports AM and shortwave, all in the same radio. So this is actually quite an interesting design. Maybe not a successful one because they didn't make too many of these, but I was not able to find much of anything about this radio itself. And also we'll find that it doesn't have a brand name that's identifiable. So you're going to see my discovery video next, and then I'm going to do a follow-on video where I decide what to do with this. Turns out it's kind of too good to scrap, and yet I don't have the desire to clean it up. So maybe it'll go to some sort of radio collector who will give it the love that it deserves. So stay tuned for the rest of the discovery here, and then watch for the follow-up video. Hello friends, in this video we're going to look at this antique tube radio. I'm guessing this is from the 1930s or so. It's actually very compact for all that it does. It's got an AM broadcast band up here, shortwave band down here. This appears to be the on and volume knob. Probably a selector knob for AM versus shortwave is here. As you can see, it's in pretty sad shape. I bought it as is for $20, which is maybe about the fair market value. This wouldn't be of really any interest to anybody but somebody who has a fascination with tubes and wants to refurbish old equipment. Someone like me, and maybe you. So we'll look at this in more detail here. We've got speaker vents on this side. The back is missing. The power cord is missing, which appears to be this part. This, I'm guessing, connected to an AM antenna, which in these units is typically built into the back cover shell as some sort of loop. So one of the things that attracted me to this is that it may have $20 worth of tubes here, just as a kind of a guess. If most of these tubes are working, they're worth probably $5 a piece or even more. So I'll get out my tube tester at some point. We'll try those out. So as our first part of this, we'll take the knobs off. Probably have to loosen some screws, so we'll do that. As I suspected, each knob had one tightening screw, so I had to take those off. The knobs may be worth something as vintage pieces. Let's look at the bottom, which I haven't really done before. Looks like the construction is fairly simple. A couple of screws to take out, and then maybe the chassis will slide out of the case. So I took these 2 wood screws out. Let's go ahead and try to lift it off. It might be glued on in these corners. Okay, that was a little scary, but it worked. Okay, now we see the underside of this. Vintage capacitors. So a lot of times the large electrolytic capacitors in the unit this old need to be replaced. Here's something of interest right away, which is a transformer that's either for the speaker or possibly for the power supply on the tubes. Now, as a guess, okay, that answers it. The speaker has its own transformer. There's something called the All-American 5, which I think came after this unit was made. Basically, it was a set of 5 tubes that worked together where you didn't need a power supply transformer to run the filament heaters of the tubes. The fact that I saw that transformer underneath is pretty good evidence that this is not an All-American 5 type design. And also I did a little research into it, and I don't think an All-American 5 was ever done with this type of tubes, which is, I think they're called octal. So on the face of it, we'll look at some obvious components here. This is probably a rectifier tube. These are power tubes of some kind with the end cap. We've got a capacitive tuner that's kind of a feature of all radios like this. It looks like one goes to each of these tubes, so maybe one is for shortwave and the other is for AM, with different capacitive banks for each band. That's what it looks like. So this obviously could use a good cleaning. We've got a light bulb here, which is typically used to light the display from behind. Let's take a look at that through this light. You can see it's translucent. A lot of dirt and grime. Some miscellaneous parts. So nothing here visually looks in bad shape. It's just dirty and old. And here's where the probably band selector switch went in. I don't know why that's kind of completely gone. I thought this would be kind of a something that goes clear to the back. Now, as a safety precaution, I should note that potentially we have high voltages inside here, but I'm kind of assuming that this thing hasn't been run in ages and whatever voltages might have been present or have leaked off. So, you know, famous last words, but that's the theory anyway. You can see that this tube socket is broken. It's kind of cracked and distorted. It isn't holding the tube well. So there isn't really a lot to recommend here as far as refurbishing this, except as, you know, maybe an archaeological project. But this is probably a parts piece in some way. So I'm going to clean this off a little bit separately, and then we'll kind of look at what the tubes are and get some more of an idea of what the design of this is. So I've taken out and cleaned the first tube on the right, which is a 25Z5. I think just by looking at it, I'm going to say that that's a full wave rectifier. So 25 volts is what the 25 means. And maybe this is an All-American 5 lineup, because the rectifier tube would probably be a 6 otherwise. So the idea is that the voltages on these tubes on the filaments add up to something like 120 for 120 volts, and these are all in series probably. So we'll look at those next. Now, as a quick tip on tubes, I found the best way to clean them is just playing with a paper towel and water, as I've got here. And in particular, you want to avoid the model number, because these kind of just wipe right off, more or less. So I've cleaned all the dirt around the rest of the tube. That's not a bad idea, to just kind of help it dissipate heat a little better. But don't wipe the model number if you possibly can avoid it. So next we've got a 6C6, also marked in the socket. I've cleaned it, as I mentioned before. I think that's an RF amplifier tube. So we'll set that aside over here. I guess I don't need to keep them in order that much because they're marked, but Off comes the next one. So this tube is 43, also marked. I'm not quite sure what that is. It kind of looks like it could be a triode, but have to look up the number on that one. I'm guessing this one's also a 6C6 RF amplifier tube. We'll find out next. So this is a 6D6 as opposed to 6C6. So I would assume that's an RF amplifier that's optimized for a different range. So maybe one is optimized for AM and the other is optimized for shortwave, whichever one is which. We'll find out. This is also a tube, even though it's in a metal case. We'll find out what that is. Might be some sort of audio amplifier tube. This one's pretty hard to read because it's pretty corroded. The model number on it seems to be K55B, which I'm not familiar with, but it has a diode symbol on it, so I think this is the detection diode. I should have figured out that we needed one of those in here somewhere. So that's probably what that is. Now let's take a look at what's left with the tubes removed. Basically the same things we were able to see before. There's a lot of dust and dirt to be blown out of here if I do anything with it. So this is typical of this era. We've got this kind of point-to-point wiring. Printed circuit boards hadn't been invented yet, and you know, in this type of compact design, you've got things kind of working in 3 dimensions without a circuit board. Let's take a look at the speaker. The cone on that is broken, so the speaker is essentially unusable. Probably not worth refurbishing. And these capacitors, we could potentially test those, but they really aren't worth saving. Nobody really wants old capacitors because they tend to go bad, even if they're not bad at the moment. We've got some miscellaneous wax capacitors that are, and some power resistors. Nothing of any real value under here from a salvage point of view. This appears to be the power transformer, like I said before, and that may have some value, but not much. So I'm not sure what voltage this 43 runs on. I don't think it's actually 43 volts. So the 43 is just a model number. It doesn't indicate a filament voltage like all these other numbers do, except for the K55. So if we add what we've got 6, 12 plus 25 is 37. So we're kind of not getting anywhere near 115. So that makes sense that we've got a power transformer of some kind to run the filament voltage. This is relatively small, so maybe at you know, a 2-to-1 step down to 50 volts or something like that, and these are actually run in series. Maybe that was an economy thing that, you know, for something like this, you can imagine it was sold as a kind of a miniature item in its day, and kind of a economical home radio, you know, just like you might have a you know, bookshelf stereo system of some kind today. So this nameplate's a little strange. It says licensed under rights of RCA, General Electric, Westinghouse, and associated companies, etc. It says Hazeltine Corporation, which might be the manufacturer, I guess, as opposed to a licensee. We've got a serial number of 122620 with a CX prefix. So I may be able to do some research and look this up on the internet. With units like this, there would typically be a schematic inside to help somebody repair it if they needed to. That was probably on the back cover that's missing, so this doesn't have it. You can see the case is in pretty rough shape, so this is really not worth salvaging in any way. You know, the The control knobs are kind of cool, but that's about it here. Now let's look at the speaker in a little more detail. In this era, this would have been an electrodynamic speaker, which means it's run by the power supply voltage as an electromagnet to drive against the other voice coil magnet, which is always here. So this large round piece is probably the electromagnet. Seems pretty hard and solid. That may be kind of worth salvaging on its own, just for curiosity. But you know, as far as are we really going to replace this paper cone, you know, I might be able to get that working just as a demo, but it's going to sound terrible with all these fractures in it. That ends our video about this vintage 1934 AM shortwave radio. If you like this, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Scooter, did you like it? Okay. Well, at least I've got one fan. And be sure and watch for a follow-on video where I kind of decide what the next step of this is going to be, whether to refurbish it or to somehow resell it to a collector, let them refurbish it. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye.